Hello, and welcome to another edition of NewsCurrents. I am your host, Gary Aubrey. Coming up, World Food Program awarded the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. Campaign 2020, Healthcare. And Tasmanian devil reintroduced to Australia after 3,000 years. But first, who am I? I was born 35 years ago in Akron, Ohio, where I grew up. Cleveland took me with the first pick in the 2003 NBA draft after I graduated from high school. In 2010, I left Cleveland to join the Miami Heat, where I helped the team win back-to-back championships. In 2014, I returned to Cleveland and helped the Cavaliers win the team's first NBA title. I am also a successful businessman and a civil rights activist. In 2018, my foundation opened the I Promise School for at-risk students in my hometown of Akron. I have played in the NBA for 17 seasons. Some people consider me the greatest player of all time. I currently play for the Los Angeles Lakers. On October 11th, the Lakers won the 2020 NBA Finals in the Orlando bubble. I am the second oldest player to ever win the Most Valuable Player award in the championship series. Who am I? LeBron James.
You've talked about how important being a dad is to you, and you've been open about the fact that that's partly because you didn't know your father growing up. You want to be the opposite. I was still pretty surprised, I got to tell you, to see your Instagram post from earlier this year. You basically wrote a note to your dad. And you said, you know what, I don't know you, I have no idea who you are, but because of you is part of the reason I am who I am today. The fuel that I use, you not being there, it's part of the reason I grew up to become who I am. What made you decide to go out like that?
I don't know, but I think it's the truth. I think, my whole life growing up, I think I just kind of always said, why me? Why me? Why didn't my dad want to be around? I feel like I'm a pretty cool kid. I'm a good kid. Why wouldn't he want to be around for me? And then as I got older and kind of had my own family, I started to think, the reason he wasn't there is the reason why I became so strong mentally, so loving to my mother. And I am who I am today because he wasn't there, because I use it as motivation. Everything that I've gained, he has a role in that because I used it.
Have you ever thought, as you've gotten older, maybe what if, should I explore a relationship with him?
Of course, the what if situation has definitely popped in my head, but I think I'm good where I am.
Well, with everything you've got ahead of yourself, basketball, new baby on the way, you're getting to raise your family in Ohio. Is there a word or two that comes to mind as you think about what's ahead?
Wow, that's a great question. One word that I can describe what's ahead is faith. I have faith in myself, faith in my family, faith in my community, and Northeast Ohio, the whole state of Ohio. I hold a huge responsibility to myself to understand that me playing the game of basketball is much bigger than me dribbling or dunking or making a game-winning shot. So the whole word faith is the number one thing I can kind of use for the very near future.
And now it's time for news names, news places, and news words. News names. Affordable Care Act. Law greatly expanding health care in the U.S., also known as Obamacare. Alfred Nobel. Swedish chemist, inventor, philanthropist, lived from 1833 to 1896. Aung San Suu Kyi. Current state councilor of Myanmar and activist. Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1991. Edward Hopper, American painter and illustrator, lived from 1882 to 1967. Fidel Castro, leader of Cuban Revolution, served as both president and prime minister of Cuba, lived from 1926 to 2016. World Food Program, UN Agency for Food Assistance, Nobel Peace Prize winner in 2020. And in news names, we have Cuba, Italy, Myanmar, New York, Sweden, and Tasmania. And news words. Carnivorous, referring to an animal that eats meat. Communism, political system in which there is no private property and the state controls the economy on behalf of the people. Embargo, ban on trading with another nation for political reasons. Marsupial, mammal belonging to the order in which young are born before they are fully developed and finish development in a pouch on the mother's belly. Monsoon, summer wind system in Asia featuring heavy rain. Nationalization, transfer of a business or property from private to public control or ownership. Option, choice, alternative. Plagiarism, act of passing off another's work as one's own. And finally, sanctions, penalties for disobeying a law or stated policy. World Food Program awarded 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. Every year, the Norwegian Nobel Committee meets to decide the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. The committee has to go through hundreds of nominations from all over the world to narrow them down to a single winner. Sometimes organizations are given the prize. In the past, these have included the Red Cross and the UNHCR, which is the UN's agency that helps refugees. This year, the committee has awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to the UN's World Food Program, or WFP, located in Rome, Italy. The WFP was recognized by the Nobel Committee for its mission to end the use of hunger as a weapon of war. Founded in 1961, the WFP is the world's largest aid program created to fight world hunger. In 2019, the organization assisted 97 million people in 88 countries. In 2015, the WFP created a goal to help end world hunger by 2030. This year, the WFP's mission is more important than ever due to the COVID-19 pandemic making problems with food security worse. In 2020, one of the WFP's main goals was to help those affected by the war in Yemen. Because of ongoing conflicts in the country, more than 24 million people there need help. It has been called the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. This year, the WFP has fed more than 12 million people in Yemen each month. The issue of hunger affects 2.7 billion people around the world, including in the U.S. On the screen, you can see the countries where hunger is a major problem. The most affected by hunger is Africa. The problem of world hunger isn't about the amount of food available. There's enough food in the world to feed everyone, but not everyone has access to the food they need. Some of the things that limit people's access to food are listed here. War is a main cause of hunger in the world. It separates families, destroys jobs, and makes growing food more difficult. More than half of the world's hungriest people live in areas where wars are taking place. Weather disasters like storms and droughts make the problem even worse. Scientists believe climate change will only make weather disasters more common. War and weather disasters also make it harder for people to earn money, which makes providing food for their families more difficult. According to the World Food Program, half of the world's population lives on less than $5.50 a day. International sanctions also play a role in world hunger. While sanctions are usually created to help stop conflicts, they often harm innocent people. Some countries sanctioned by the U.S. include Cuba, Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea. Alfred Nobel was the creator of the Nobel Prize. He was born in Sweden, shown on the map. Nobel lived during the 1800s. He was a scientist and businessman whose greatest success came from his invention of dynamite, the powerful explosive. When people learned what dynamite could do for them, Nobel became a very rich man. But he was upset that his inventions were also being used to create weapons. So he left instructions that when he died, his fortune should be used to fund an annual prize for the people who had provided, quote, the greatest benefit to humankind, unquote. The first Nobel Prizes were awarded in 1901. At first, there were only 5 prize categories: peace, literature, chemistry, medicine, and physics. Economics was added in 1969. The Nobel Prizes are among the most respected awards in the world. All the awards are given in Nobel's home country of Sweden, except for the Peace Prize, which is given in Norway. Winning a Nobel Prize means lots of attention for the winner, as well as a large cash award. This year, each prize is worth more than $900,000.
And so we work with the people on rehabilitating the land with what we call half moons, and now we have...
The head of the World Food Programme, David Beasley, was on a trip to West Africa. He'd been in Burkina Faso and then was in Niger, two countries blighted by conflict and hunger, when he heard the news.
I mean, this is the first time in my life I've been speechless. I mean, this is unbelievable. Talk about the most exciting point in time in your life is the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's because of the WFP family. They're out there in the most difficult, complex places in the world, whether it's war, conflict, climate extremes, it doesn't matter. They're out there and they deserve this award. And wow, 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 wow. I can't believe it.
Before the Nobel announcement, some had predicted the Peace Prize might go to the World Health Organization, but that would have been controversial. The agency and its head, Dr. Tedros, are at the center of disputes between the US and China, with the Trump administration pulling its funding. Instead, another part of the UN family deeply impacted by COVID-19 was chosen.
For its efforts to combat hunger, for its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict.
The World Food Programme has had a major logistical challenge delivering food this year, with large parts of the global shipping and aviation networks closed. Instead, it's had to find alternatives. One expert told me WFP is currently probably the largest airline in Africa. The award goes to the agency for its work and to all its 17,000 staff. But Executive Director David Beasley has been a bold and passionate leader, repeatedly linking conflict and hunger in his speeches in the UN Security Council. The job has, since the 1980s, always gone to an American. Mr. Beasley is a former Republican governor of South Carolina who knows President Trump well. He's had a difficult year, himself contracting COVID-19 early in the pandemic, but he ends it with the presentation of the award in December, recognition of the agency's ever-growing workload. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the United Nations.
You want it. It's all of us.
Tasmanian devil reintroduced to Australia after 3,000 years. The animal you see here is a Tasmanian devil. Tasmanian devils once roamed wild across Australia, but around 3,000 years ago, they disappeared from the area. Experts believe the population loss was due to predators like the dingoes, which are a kind of wild dog. Today, the devils are only native to the island of Tasmania, off the coast of Australia. Only about 25,000 devils remain on the island. As a result, the animal is considered endangered. But thanks to the help of a conservation group called Aussie Ark, Tasmanian devils have a chance to thrive on the Australian mainland once again. This month, the group released 11 devils into a fenced-in area of the Barrington Tops National Park. Here you see actor Chris Hemsworth and his wife Elsa Pataky working with the Aussie Ark to release 2 devils into the wild. The rewilding of the Tasmanian devil serves as a bright spot for Australia this year. The country faced devastating wildfires earlier in the year that killed, hurt, or displaced over 3 billion animals. Experts are hopeful that reintroducing the devils will help rebalance natural ecosystems and help other species thrive. Tasmanian devils belong to a family of animals known as marsupials. Marsupials are mammals whose young is born early in development. Female marsupials then carry the baby in a pouch until it is fully developed. Some other marsupials include koalas, kangaroos, opossums, and more. While Tasmanian devils are only about the size of a small dog, they are the largest carnivorous marsupials on the planet. Though small, Tasmanian devils can kill animals larger than themselves, including kangaroos and wombats. They are also known to eat up to 40% of their body weight in only 30 minutes. The devils can also eat all the parts of their prey, including the bones and fur. They also feed on frogs, snakes, and insects. Tasmanian devils are fierce hunters because of their powerful jaws. They have one of the most powerful bites in the animal kingdom and are even capable of biting through metal wires. In the photos here, you can see the devil's long whiskers. These help them sense prey while hunting in the dark. When baby devils are born, they are only about the size of a grain of rice. They spend the first 105 days in their mother's pouch, and while they may look cute, Tasmanian devils don't make for good pets. Campaign 2020 Healthcare. President Trump's main goal is to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Very few topics show a wider gap between the two major presidential nominees than their views about health care. Donald Trump ran on a promise to get rid of the national health care law known as the ACA, or the Affordable Care Act. This law, passed during the Obama administration, ended the practice of insurers rejecting people just for having pre-existing health conditions. The plan also helped to provide health insurance coverage for 20 million Americans not covered before. At first, the ACA also featured an individual mandate for coverage. This mandate required people to sign up for health insurance or face a fine for not doing so. As president, Trump was able to get rid of this individual mandate. Much of the rest of the ACA is still in place, but the issue is now on the Supreme Court docket, where the ACA could either be upheld or ruled unconstitutional by the justices. Trump campaigned on the promise to lower prescription drug prices. He has signed 4 executive orders to do this, but these orders have had no effect on drug prices, which have actually grown over the last 3.5 years. Trump also said he has a plan to replace the ACA that would be better for Americans, but so far he has not released any details of this plan. Joe Biden says that if the ACA is overturned, millions of Americans would lose their health insurance. He says it would also mean that private companies might be able to go back to the practice of rejecting people with pre-existing conditions. Biden says he wants to strengthen and diversify the ACA, providing new plans and lowering prices. He will also introduce a public option. What this means, it would be a lower-cost government-backed health insurance plan that many people could buy if they don't have or don't like their private health insurance. Biden has rejected the idea of Medicare for all. Under Medicare for all, every American would receive health insurance coverage provided by the government. Supporters of Medicare for all say this plan would save individuals in the country a lot of money, while making sure everyone has health care. However, it would mean eliminating private health insurance, and Biden doesn't want to do that. Like Trump, Biden wants to lower prescription drug costs. He has released a plan to accomplish this. He wants to limit the amount of money that drug companies can charge for medications. Biden also says that the government must be able to lower drug prices on behalf of Medicare, something they can't do now.
The days of ripping off American patients are over.
We should do it by building on Obamacare, not scrapping it.
Healthcare was already a top concern among U.S. voters. The current health crisis is likely to shine an even brighter spotlight on the healthcare policy differences between President Donald Trump and the Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Here's a look at how the two rivals clash on key issues.
And part of the thing is you want to keep it the way it is.
President Trump resisted national testing and tracing programs and sent mixed messages on face masks. But he has signed off on multi-trillion-dollar relief bills and accelerated vaccine research. He's also consistently pushed states to reopen for business. Biden's vowed to listen to the science, even if that involves another national economic shutdown. He's pro-masks and wants scaled-up testing and tracing.
President Trump's pandemic response has been pretty widely criticized. If you look at polls, I think it's fair to say that the single biggest reason why he's losing in national polls to Joe Biden is because people are disappointed in the way that he's responded to the pandemic.
You ever see Sleepy Joe with the little circles?
Trump's turn to the courts and executive power to undermine the Affordable Care Act, popularly known as Obamacare. The Trump administration has not proposed a comprehensive replacement, but the Republican-backed 2017 tax bill eliminated the ACA's individual mandate, which required most people to maintain insurance or face a penalty.
The big thing that the Trump administration is doing right now is backing a lawsuit that's been brought by a number of Republican controlled states to try to declare the entire Affordable Care Act invalid. As everyone now knows, the Supreme Court could have a 6-3 conservative majority by the time that it hears that case. It's currently scheduled to hear the case on November 10th, which is 1 week after Election Day. And so if the Trump administration has its way, the Supreme Court will throw out the ACA, which would potentially cost more than 20 million people their health insurance and eliminate the protections for pre-existing conditions that Obamacare had put into law.
Biden has vowed to bolster the law passed while he was VP. His own $750 billion healthcare plan would be financed by taxes on the wealthy and would extend coverage to more low-income Americans. Trump proposed spending cuts to Medicare for those over 65 or with a disability, and to Medicaid for those on a low income. His administration supports limitations on Medicaid eligibility and caps on Medicaid spending growth. Biden's proposed lowering the Medicare eligibility age to 60, potentially extending coverage to some 20 million more Americans.
Early Edward Hopper paintings found to be copies. Edward Hopper, the famous American painter, once said, quote, "The only real influence I've ever had was myself," unquote. But although he always claimed to be completely original, a recent discovery by art student Louis Chadwick shows that no artist can entirely escape being influenced by others. Hopper was born in Nyack, New York in 1882. As a teenager, Hopper created several paintings to show his family. One of them was ships, but Chadwick recently discovered that ships look almost exactly like an earlier work by painter Edward Morin. At least 4 other early Hopper paintings were copied from illustrations in Art Interchange, a magazine for art students. This has led some to wonder whether Hopper should be considered a plagiarist. However, other people point out that many young artists get started by copying other people's works. In the quote here, the storyteller by the Hopper House Museum in Nyack claims that this method taught Edward Hopper to see. Furthermore, Edward Hopper never tried to exhibit these paintings as his own work. After the artist died in 1967, a family friend found them in the attic of Hopper House and started showing them as the artist's original work. Edward Hopper started to find his own artistic path during his time at the New York School of Art and Design. He spent days studying apartment buildings and seascapes in and around New York City, trying to come up with his own style. To earn a living, he created magazine illustrations and designed posters for movies and plays. But he did this commercial work only 3 days a week. Although he won awards for his illustrations, Hopper did not sell his first painting until he was 31 years old. Hopper's artistic reputation grew during the next few decades. He became known for being able to create drama in the simplest subjects. House by the Railroad, for example, has an inescapable feeling of dread even though it is set during the daytime. Nighthawks is Hopper's most famous painting. Like much of Hopper's work, Nighthawks seems simple at first, but on further viewing reveals undefinable feelings. Some experts say it illustrates the isolation and loneliness of much of human life. Edward Hopper had a high opinion of his own status in the art world, but he often predicted that his work would be forgotten after his death. He died in 1967 at the age of 84. Today, his work is featured in major museums around the world, and one sold for more than $90 million in 2018.
Judith Barter, Field McCormick Chair and Curator of American Art.
Nighthawks is a really fascinating painting. It's such an American painting. The Americanness is in many of the details. The Philly cigar ad above the diner, the salt shakers, the heavy-duty porcelain mugs, the napkin holders, the big coffee urns in the back, the soda jerk with his cap on. It's what America was like and what America liked in the 30s and 40s.
But look closer. There's something unrealistic and off-putting about Edward Hopper's scene.
It looks real, but it's not. There's no sense of real depth. When you try to go deep into this picture, it pushes you back to the surface. He uses acid greens against bright yellows and oranges. The red dress of the woman with her orange hair. These set your teeth on edge in a way, but they do work together. He was a brilliant colorist. And if you look at the diner, there's no way in or out except through that orange door that ostensibly goes to the kitchen. So it's sort of a hermetically sealed environment with these 4 people in this diner at night.
And no one is talking. To many, Nighthawks evokes a sense of loneliness. But Hopper himself disagreed with this interpretation. In an interview, he said,
"Well, I think those are the words of critics. It may be true and it may not be true. It's how the viewer looks on the pictures, what he sees in them."
What I see in Hopper is a sort of sense of everyman, that any of us could be sitting in this diner. It's really the idea of we are individuals, but we have a collective consciousness as well. I think people just relate to the everydayness of it. They can put themselves in these pictures.
Country of the Week, Myanmar. Myanmar is in Southeast Asia with a coast along the Indian Ocean. It is bordered by Bangladesh, India, China, Laos, and Thailand. Myanmar's population is around 53.5 million. Myanmar sits within Asia's monsoon region, and part of the country experiences heavy rainfall every year. The eastern half of the country, however, is mostly mountainous and gets much less rain. Myanmar's largest waterway is the Irrawaddy River, which is home to many species of fish, mammals, and reptiles. Most people in Myanmar live around the Irrawaddy River and use its water to irrigate rice paddies. Rice is the main crop in Myanmar, and rice fields take up 60% of the country's arable land. About 65% of the population are farmers. In addition to rice, many grow plants like corn, beans, and sugarcane. Myanmar makes most of its money through farming and oil exports, and it is a large producer of gemstones. 90% of the world's rubies come from Myanmar. The largest city in Myanmar is Yangon. Yangon was the capital of the country before it was moved to Naypyidaw in 2006. Around 5 million people live in Yangon, and it is the commercial and cultural center of the country. Aung San Suu Kyi is the state chancellor and leader of Myanmar. Aung San Suu Kyi was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991 for her efforts to bring democracy to Myanmar. She has been in power since 2016, but her time in office has been controversial because of her campaign against the Rohingya minority. Myanmar is also often called Burma, a name that originates from its time as a British colony. The country gained independence in 1948 and officially changed its name to Myanmar in 1989. Aung San, who was a general and a political theorist, is often seen as the father of Myanmar because of what he did to free the country from British rule. Aung San was killed just 6 months before Myanmar became independent, but he is still a popular figure. Current State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi is his daughter. Myanmar was taken over by a junta in 1962. A junta is a group of soldiers and military officers that seizes control of a government. The junta was a restrictive government that used violence to suppress political dissent. In spite of this, many pro-democracy movements took root in Myanmar, including the Saffron Revolution in 2007. The Saffron Revolution helped bring an end to the junta in 2011, and in 2015 Myanmar held open elections. About 88% of the population of Myanmar is Buddhist, and Buddhism plays a big role in the nation's culture. There are many Buddhist temples all around Myanmar, including the Sule Pagoda in Yangon. The Sule Pagoda was allegedly built during the Buddha's lifetime, about 2,600 years ago. There are populations of religious minorities in Myanmar, including the Muslim Rohingya people. In 2016 and 2017, the military committed genocide against the Rohingya, killing more than 25,000 people and forcing more than 700,000 to flee the country. This week in history, the U.S. embargo against Cuba began in 1960 and is still going. The United States imposed an embargo against Cuba 60 years ago. Cuba is a small island nation located just 90 miles from Florida. But the U.S. government has had unfriendly relations with this tiny country since 1959, and the embargo is still going on today. The roots of the conflict began in the early 20th century. The U.S. saw Cuba as a great place for business. American oil companies set up refineries there, and American companies owned 60% of the island's sugar industry as well. Havana, the country's capital, was a popular tourist spot often called the Latin Las Vegas. In order to keep up this control of the Cuban economy, the U.S. government put pressure on Cuba's leaders to favor U.S. business interests. In 1952, the U.S. backed a coup led by former Cuban President Fulgencio Batista. The U.S. government supported Batista for the next 7 years, even though he had taken power illegally and executed 20,000 of his own citizens. But even though American companies were profiting from Cuba's resources and spending lots of money in Cuba, very little of this money ever went to the island's many poor people. This infuriated many Cubans, including Fidel and Raul Castro, two brothers who were influenced by communist teachings. Under a communist system, the state owns all the property and businesses in a country, and the wealth is supposed to be shared by all the people. In 1959, the Castros led a successful revolution in Cuba, establishing a communist government just 90 miles from Florida. This upset U.S. leaders, who were worried about the influence of a group of communist countries led by Russia called the Soviet Union. At the time, the U.S. and Russia were in the middle of a long period of hostility called the Cold War. When Cuba aligned itself with the Soviet Union, the U.S. decided it would not sell weapons to Cuba anymore. In 1960, Cuba started to buy weapons from the Soviet Union. The U.S. responded by refusing to sell oil to Cuba or buy Cuban sugar. Castro fought back by seizing U.S. oil and gas companies operating in Cuba and put them under the control of the government. This is called nationalization. In response, U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower imposed a strict trade embargo against Cuba on October 19, 1960. Under this embargo, U.S. businesses would not sell anything to Cuba except food and medicine. Cuba then nationalized all American businesses and property. This second wave of nationalizations led the U.S. to cut all diplomatic ties with Cuba and to tighten the embargo even further by not allowing travel to or from the island. But although this embargo greatly affected Cuba's economy, its people were able to survive, even without new goods or technology from the U.S. Instead of importing American items, they found new trade relationships. Instead of buying new cars, Cubans learned to maintain their old ones for many years. The Cold War ended when the Soviet Union broke up in the 1990s. But the U.S. embargo against Cuba continues to this very day. Trade has increased somewhat between the two countries, and U.S. tourists are now able to visit Cuba again. In 2014, Barack Obama became the first U.S. president to visit the island since 1928. Although Donald Trump has reversed some of Obama's Cuba policies, American tourists still visit Cuba on a regular basis. The picture here was taken recently in the Old Havana neighborhood.
In April 2015, President Barack Obama finally removed Cuba from the list of countries that support terrorism. This move, along with a mutual agreement by the U.S. and Cuba to discuss improved relations, is a big step toward lifting the half-century-long embargo against the communist island. Here's a timeline to help better understand the Cuba embargo. 1959, Fidel Castro leads an invasion of Cuba, instituting himself as a communist dictator. The following year, the Cuban government takes over all U.S. businesses in Cuba. In response, President Dwight D. Eisenhower cuts off relations with Cuba and institutes a presidential proclamation to block exports. President John F. Kennedy and the CIA attempt a failed invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. The CIA also orchestrates a number of plots to assassinate Fidel Castro, but none succeed. The USSR sends nuclear missiles to Cuba, prompting the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy orders a total economic embargo, including travel and imports on Cuba. After decades of stalemate, Cuba shoots down 2 U.S. aircrafts. The U.S. passes the Helms-Burton Act, which makes the embargo official U.S. law instead of a presidential proclamation. President Bill Clinton eases parts of the Cuban embargo, allowing food, medicine, and humanitarian supplies. Later, he allows Cuban Americans to send money to their families and lifts certain travel restrictions. The U.S. Secretary of State lists Cuba as an axis of evil country for reportedly attempting to develop biological weapons. President George W. Bush increases sanctions on Cuba, restricting travel and money transfers. Fidel Castro's brother, Raul, takes over as president of Cuba. President Obama lifts the Bush-imposed travel and money restrictions. Raul Castro and President Obama agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations after more than a year of secret talks involving Pope Francis. The new changes lift a number of restrictions on Cuba. President Obama removes Cuba from the list of sponsored terrorism countries. It seems that after decades of embargo, the relationship between Cuba and the United States is beginning to normalize. It appears to be only a matter of time until the two countries finally resolve their decades-long animosity.
And now it's time for Faces and Places. Eddie Van Halen. Famous rock musician Eddie Van Halen died on October 6th. He was 65 years old. Eddie Van Halen played guitar in the rock group Van Halen, along with his brother Alex. Van Halen was born in Amsterdam, Netherlands, before his family eventually settled in California. He and his brother both learned guitar at a young age, and they formed their first band together in the 4th grade. The band Van Halen became internationally known after the release of their self-titled album in 1978. After that, the band would go on to release 13 Billboard Rock Chart #1 hits. Van Halen was introduced into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2007. Today, Eddie Van Halen is viewed as one of the most influential rock guitarists of all time. He has also collaborated with many of the other influential musicians, including Michael Jackson and Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. After his death, musicians all around the world offered tributes to the guitarist on social media. Louise Gluck. At the beginning of October, American poet Louise Gluck was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Gluck has been publishing poetry since the 1960s and is considered one of the most important voices in modern poetry. Born in New York in 1943, Gluck became interested in poetry at a young age and began writing it herself at the age of 5. Gluck is known to draw inspiration from mythology, and the primary theme of many of her poems is trauma. She often focuses on difficult situations and ideas such as death, rejection, and relationship failures. Many of her poems also highlight the importance of the natural world. Gluck has been honored many times for her contributions to the world of poetry. She was the U.S. Poet Laureate between 2003 and 2004, and she received the National Humanities Medal in 2015. She is the first female poet to be awarded the prize since 1996.
Literary tipsters failed to put Louise Gluck in the frame for this coveted $1 million prize. It came as a surprise.
The Nobel Prize in Literature for 2020 is awarded to the American poet Louise Gluck for her unmistakable poetic voice that with austere beauty makes individual existence universal.
Gluck, seen here with the then US President Barack Obama awarding her the National Humanities Medal of 2015, has always shunned publicity. She was the American Poet Laureate in 2003 and 4, although thought to be reluctant about it. Now Gluck is the first American woman to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 27 years.
It's fantastic that women's poetry has been recognized in this way. I'm really, really excited about the award for that reason. She does talk about female experience, but she also talks about, wider concerns that affect us all: life, death, love, betrayal, and jealousy.
Controversy had damaged the Nobel Academy for the past few years. It included the choice of Austrian writer Peter Henke for the Literary Prize.
Yes. Make a closure here.
That caused uproar as he had portrayed Serbia as a victim in the 1990s Balkan Wars. In Bosnia, he was accused of being an apologist for a war criminal, Slobodan Milosevic. Gluck's poetry is seen as a breath of fresh air by her publishers in the UK for the past 20 years.
The nice thing about her is that she doesn't tick any of the boxes that usually lead to prizes. There's no sense in which she's politically incorrect, but on the other hand, she's not particularly politically correct either. There's no preaching in her work. I find her tremendously refreshing in a world where almost all writers seem to be politically driven or politically terrified, so that they don't dare say anything.
Some observers say Louise Gluck was a safe choice by the judges. Right or wrong, the 77-year-old poet is certain now to reach a broader international readership. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera.
And in Michigan, on October 8, 2020, 13 people were charged in connection with a plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The people charged were mostly members of a right-wing Michigan militia group who planned to overthrow several state governments. The militia members believed certain state governments were, quote, violating the U.S. Constitution, unquote. Members of the militia group planned to storm the state capitol building in an attempt to charge Whitmer with treason. Federal agents and state police worked for several months to uncover the plot, eventually leading to the arrest in October. After the arrest, Governor Whitmer held a press conference in which she cast blame on President Trump, who recently refused to denounce white supremacists and militia groups during a presidential debate. When our leaders speak out, Whitmer said during the press conference, their words matter. They carry weight.
The growing political fallout from alleged terrorist plot to violently overthrow the Michigan state government. 6 men connected with a right-wing group are charged with trying to carry out an elaborate plan to kidnap the Democratic governor of Michigan. 7 others are charged with providing material support.
The group allegedly wanted to try Governor Gretchen Whitmer for what they call treason or potentially kill her. Jeff Pegues is in Washington. Jeff, how did law enforcement stop this plot?
Well, it took a lot of FBI resources, that is for sure. It took undercover operatives, confidential informants, and dozens of recordings. Investigators tell us this is a plot that had been in the planning stages since about June. The group even had a meeting planned for this week until the FBI moved in. According to an FBI affidavit, the alleged conspirators met in a room under a trap door in a home, spent the summer training with firearms and explosives, and tried to recruit 200 men to storm the state capitol building and take hostages, including Governor Whitmer, who they planned to try for treason.
The alleged conspirators used operational security measures, including communicating by encrypted messaging platforms, and used code words and phrases.
Prosecutors say the group eventually decided to kidnap Whitmer at her vacation home, even going so far as to conduct surveillance there. One of the alleged ringleaders, Adam Fox, said that Governor Whitmer has uncontrolled power right now and described the plan as a snatch and grab. Another, Barry Croft, later stated, all good things must come to an end. Governor Whitmer has faced significant pressure from right-wing groups for her refusal to lift strict coronavirus lockdowns, something that also made her a favorite target of President Trump, who in April tweeted, "Liberate Michigan." Later that month, 2 of the suspects are seen at the Capitol with armed militia groups that have been storming the building to fight pandemic restrictions. Some of the suspects were also visible online, their social media accounts riddled with anti-government and pro-gun views.
These politicians that keep robbing us and taking our money.
But information gathered through confidential informants is what ultimately foiled their alleged plot. Yesterday, Governor Whitmer thanked law enforcement for their efforts, while also pointing the blame at President Trump for what she says is legitimizing the actions of extremist groups.
The President of the United States stood before the American people and refused to condemn white supremacists and hate groups like these 2 Michigan militia groups.
The president responded last night.
And, you know, I see Whitmer today. She's complaining, but it was our Justice Department that arrested the people that she was complaining about. It was my Justice Department that arrested them.
The militia group identifies itself as the Wolverine Watchmen. Not in the court papers is whether President Trump's statements or actions influence the group in any way. If convicted on all these charges, the suspects face up to life behind bars. Gail.
I'll take this one. Jeff, thank you very much. All the more concerning now, just 20-odd days to Election Day itself.
And finally, in Louisiana, on Friday, October 9th, Hurricane Delta made landfall in Louisiana. Hurricane Delta arrived only 6 weeks after another storm, Hurricane Laura, which caused substantial damage across the Gulf Coast. Delta was considered a Category 2 hurricane at landfall, and the storm resulted in the deaths of 4 people. In addition, over 140,000 remained without power the following Monday. Delta is the 5th hurricane to make landfall in the U.S. and the 10th named storm to hit the country this year. That number breaks a record previously set in 1916, when 9 named storms hit the U.S. Many areas around the Gulf Coast were still recovering from Hurricane Laura when Delta struck. About 7,000 residents of Lake Charles, Louisiana, were still displaced by the previous storm. Scientists warn that major weather events like hurricanes will increase in frequency if actions are not taken to halt the effects of climate change.
The aftermath of Hurricane Delta, 48 hours after slamming into Louisiana, more than 300,000 customers are still without power. Homes in Lake Charles underwater after the second hurricane to strike there in just 6 weeks. Heavy rain moving up into Tennessee and Georgia. You see it right there. And take a look at this, a freight train derailing on flooded tracks in Georgia, leading to a hazmat emergency situation. Homes around there evacuated. And the remnants of Delta are still on the move. Here's ABC senior meteorologist Rob Marciano.
Tonight, the remnants of Hurricane Delta wreaking havoc in the south after slamming into Louisiana as a Category 2 hurricane. At least 7 reported tornadoes across the southeast. First responders forming a human chain, rescuing people from chest-high floodwater in North Georgia. Heavy rain swamping parts of I-75. This massive train derailing, causing a hazmat situation and evacuations outside of Atlanta. Water pouring into homes. Residents wading through the debris. In Louisiana, 300,000 customers still without power tonight. Residents picking up the pieces from Delta's devastation. 100-mile-per-hour winds toppling trees, ripping roofs off of homes, and knocking down power lines.
The north side of town was completely dark. There was nothing.
Delta hitting Louisiana just 6 weeks after Hurricane Laura. The 2 storms making landfall just 12 miles apart. The White family living out of their camper.
The power was out for 27 days actually for us. I know there's still people without power from the first one.
Lake Charles residents know they have a long road to recovery.
I feel very hopeless. I don't know if I'm going to be able to live through the put back together, only to have it destroyed again.
All right, Rob joins us now just back from the storm zone. And Rob, the remnants of Delta are still packing a punch far from the Gulf Coast?
Very much so, Tom. Matter of fact, remnants of Delta will be here in New York City in the next 36 hours. Take a look at where the center of this thing is. It's just in North Georgia, near Chattanooga, Tennessee. Strong storms, as you saw, in this area, but the heaviest rain is bumping up against that front. So we put the maps into motion. You'll see the pulses of heavy rain in D.C. and Baltimore and Ocean City tomorrow, and then Philadelphia as well throughout the afternoon. The heavy stuff stays south of New York until tomorrow night, and then lifts into New England, where some of this will be beneficial rains, but in places like New Jersey, where it'll be the heaviest, we could very well see some flooding there. Tom?
Okay, Rob, thank you for that.
And now it's time for Where in the World. The U.S. embargo against this country began in 1960, number 4. That would be the country of Cuba. Edward Hopper grew up in Nyack, located in this state, number 1. That would be the state of New York. The World Food Program's headquarters is located in this country, number 6. That would be the country of Italy. Alfred Nobel lived and worked in this country, number 3. That would be the country of Sweden. Aung San Suu Kyi is this nation's state counselor, number 2. That would be the country of Myanmar. And finally, Tasmania is located off the southwestern coast of this nation, number 5. That would be the nation of Australia. And now it's time for Remember When. These actors struck fear into our hearts for decades. Were you a fan of old horror movies? We're not talking about today's slasher films. When we say horror movies, we mean classic monster movies and suspense thrillers. The 5 actors shown here were well known for their villainous portrayals. Let's remember their iconic work, starting with what many call the Big 3. The first of the Big 3 to debut was Dracula, released in February of 1931. This movie, released by Universal, starred Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula. Lugosi was born in Hungary in 1882. He was a celebrated actor there as a young man. In 1920, he immigrated to the U.S. 3 years later, he was starring in Broadway plays. Lugosi toured the U.S. playing Count Dracula on stage before he finally landed the film role. In the movie, he was able to use his strong accent and intense presence to scare audiences all over the world. But after becoming a star, Lugosi was rarely able to land great roles again, except in other horror movies such as The Black Cat, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and The Raven. Later in 1931, Universal introduced moviegoers to another horror icon. Boris Karloff was somewhat well known by the time he got the role as the scary, dangerous, but somehow tragic figure of Frankenstein's monster. This British Indian actor had already appeared in 80 movies before Frankenstein premiered in November of 1931. But this movie made him a massive star overnight. He played the monster again in Bride of Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein. But unlike Lugosi, Karloff was able to establish a long career in which he was helped by his very low voice and dry sense of humor. The third big monster movie released by Universal came 10 years after Dracula and Frankenstein. This movie, The Wolfman, starred an actor named Lon Chaney Jr. His father was a film and stage legend who had been called the Man of 1,000 Faces. But Lon Chaney Jr. was mostly known for the fury and horrifying face you see here. Before The Wolfman, most people weren't scared of the full moon. But when ordinary Larry Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr., sees this moon, he transforms into a hairy beast. Chaney had to do this a lot, as he also filmed 4 sequels to The Wolfman. Lon Chaney Jr. went on to have a long career as a character actor. Vincent Price, a character actor from St. Louis, started appearing in horror movies in 1939. His deep, rich voice was featured in movies like The Invisible Man Returns, but he also appeared in well-regarded movies such as Laura and Leave Her to Heaven. Starting with the 1953's House of Wax, he became mostly known for scary movies, TV shows, and radio plays. He was the eccentric millionaire in House on Haunted Hill, and the title character in The Mad Magician. He also appeared in 8 movie adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe's stories in the 1960s, including the main role in 1962's Tales of Terror. Price is also known for his voiceover work, especially on Michael Jackson's hit song Thriller. And we cannot end without mentioning British actor Christopher Lee. Due to his imposing 6'5" frame, his hypnotic eyes, and his rich voice, Hammer Films cast him in a series of vampire films from the 1950s to the 1970s. These movies were cheaply made, but stylish in their own way. Lee became iconic as Dracula, but he also played 2 other famous villainous roles. He played the evil Count Dooku in the Star Wars movies. He also played the evil sorcerer Sauron in the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Of Dr. Verdigast's weakness. He is the unfortunate victim of one of the commoner phobias, but in an extreme form. He has an intense and all-consuming horror of cats.
Ancient books say that the black cat is the living embodiment of evil. And that evil enters into the nearest living thing.
It is the black cat does not die. Those same books, if I am not mistaken, teach that the black cat is deathless. Deathless as evil. It is the origin of the common superstition of a cat with 9 lives.
And that's it for this latest edition of NewsCurrents. Join us again next week for another new edition of NewsCurrents. This is ECTV.
Ha 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 ha!